Yo, what's going on, guys? This is your man Jose, aka the Dominican Dream, for the Boxing Roundtable, and we are ready to talk boxing today on with boxing fan, uh, a special guest friend of mine, Ralph.
Thank you for having me on.
All right, man. Something that could be foreseen. This kind of behavior, this kind of cherry picking behavior, if you want to call it that. That's what I call it. Um, there were a lot of fans out there saying that David Benavidez, the guy who has been the mandatory for Canelo for about 3 years or so, had basically no merit and no grounds on which to fight Canelo, and he didn't deserve the fight. And why would he be given the fight? And that's simply a delusional point of view. And if you were one of the fans, uh, propagating that kind of point of view, how can you now defend what is being? I'm sure you got to notice from ESPN. All fans are probably talking about that right now. Canelo Alvarez finalizing a matchup between himself and Edgar Berlanga. If people thought David Benavidez hadn't done shit to get the fight, which is an absolute farce of a comment. It's an absolute farce of a point of view. It's an absolute lie. We know that the guy who has done the most, we know that the guy with the most credentials to fight Canelo Alvarez is David Benavidez. He's been the mandatory for 3 fucking years. And anyway, what are your thoughts on that, man?
Well, it's not surprising, just like you mentioned. I think most important is the fact that, like you said, David has been mandatory for 3+ years, and all this time they've been pissing on us and calling it rain. I mean, it is what it is. At the end of the day, Canelo is going to move the way that he wants to move, and the fans, the hardcore fans, are going to support whatever nonsense that he ends up doing because they like to pick and choose a narrative and talk out of both sides of their mouth. So
But
a
were you
lot
talking
of the
about the
time,
hardcore boxing fans or the hardcore Canelo fans?
no,
I
no,
think there's
no.
a
The
difference there.
hardcore Canelo fans, the hardcore boxing fans, they don't, they obviously they don't really support none of this. They obviously want to see the Canelo Benavides fight, but some more than others, obviously look down on this as pretty much a stain on the legacy of Canelo Alvarez.
Listen, man, this is simply I saw something like this coming, but honestly, man, I thought that I thought that choosing Berlanga would be an extreme. I thought that would be an extreme, and to me, it's just a joke. It's laughable and it's sad, all at the same time. Who the fuck wants to see this? I mean, it again, the one of the biggest fights that has been on deck that could be made in boxing for the last a year and a half, almost 2 years, has been Benavidez, Canelo Alvarez. Within the last year, absolutely the biggest fight that could be made. There is no excuse. You talk about different sides of the streets. These guys are both PBC fighters. These guys are both 168 pounders. Okay, Benavidez just moved up to 175, and then I believe he said that he was going back to 168. I'm not sure about that. I don't know if you can confirm, but we know that he would go. He's been at 168. They're both with the same promotional company. What the fuck is the holdup? What the fuck is the matter? There's obviously a reason why Canelo Alvarez doesn't want to give him the fight. He doesn't want to get embarrassed. He doesn't want to get his ass whooped. He doesn't want to get, what he calls weight bullied or anything like that. Again, we saw Benavidez at 175 pounds. He didn't look spectacular. So he's one of those tweeners. To me, he's a guy that he looks too big at 168, but he can still make the weight and might be too small for 175 pounds. He simply doesn't have the physique. He doesn't have that that muscle mass, that muscle mass that 175 pounders have. He's just one of those flaccid body type kind of individuals, but he can fight. He knows how to fight. He knows how to box. He is a monster. And at 168 pounds, he seems to be at his prime, at his premier weight as far as his performances go. At the end of the day, I think there's a lot of people that are going to be critiquing this. Are people going to buy it? Yeah, sure. It's Mexico versus Puerto Rican American because he's not from the island. I don't even know if he speaks Spanish. He probably doesn't. So,
Correct.
it's they're trying to like you said, man. It's shit on a stick. It's shit on a stick.
Yep. Right.
This is almost like a Jake Paul kind of situation.
A
Yeah,
hundred percent.
it's a guy who's is nowhere near the level of a Benavidez, the level of any of those top 4 or 5 168 pounders, including Canelo Alvarez. Will we see it? Yeah. Will we buy it? No. So look, I think it's a joke. I think it's laughable, and I think anybody defending this move by Canelo is simply delusional. I understand, yes, Canelo has fought people in the past, but who has he really? You know what? I'm not even gonna get into that because that's an argument that uh, you know the hardcore Canelo fans are gonna try to make me look like I will lose. At the end of the day, Canelo's still at the end of his prime, and he has avoided successfully his biggest threat the last 2 years. Not only the biggest, he's about the money. He's about making big fights. That's the biggest fight that could be made in boxing. Still, do you think is there another fight that could be bigger than that in boxing today?
Arguably the Crawford fight, which I don't want to see it, but a lot of the casual fan base that don't really understand boxing cannot discern the difference between weight classes, and because of that, that may be a bigger fight than what we actually understand that it can be. But honestly, the Benavides Canelo is practically the biggest fight out there. I mean, when you see Stephen A. Smith going on ESPN and talking about that this is the fight that most boxing fans genuinely want, then we definitely see that as a big match.
That's a
I
great
mean,
point. I mean,
yeah,
I can't really dispute that about Crawford Canelo being a bigger fight. But here, this is the boxing roundtable, and we are hardcore knowledgeable fans. We understand that that is not a fight that a true hardcore fan wants to see because there's a 21-pound difference. He will be moving up 3 weight classes. Okay, this is going to be Crawford's first fight at 154 pounds against Israeli Madrimov coming up on August 3rd. But it's his first fight at 154, so he still hasn't debuted at the weight. So literally,
right.
he would be jumping up 3 weight classes to fight Canelo Alvarez. It's a fight that I don't even speak about because it doesn't make sense. So I'm talking
Right.
about a fight that makes sense, a fight that's within the norms of what boxing should be, right? Two people in their same weight class who have been in the same weight class, two people in the same weight class who have been in the same weight class for years, right? And one has been the mandatory on several occasions and probably still to this day to fight him. They're both one is Mexican American and Mexican and Ecuadorian, and the other guy is from Mexico. So they're both action fighters. They're both come forward fighters. More so David Benavidez. Canelo's a guy who can come forward, but we understand that sometimes he likes to sit. He doesn't have great footwork. He likes to sit back and counter. At the end of the day, anyone that says that this is a better fight, a better sell, is simply delusional, man. And there's really no way to defend this fight over a Benavidez fight. Bottom line,
I
period.
I mean, the better question that we should be asking regarding the Berlanga and Canelo fight matchup is how much does this fight really sells? That should be the realistic question for this fight. because the lower that it sails, the more of a push and pressure that you'll have on Canelo and his team to actually make the bigger fights. So I'll give you that question, like how many pay-per-view buys do you think that fight does?
Look, I don't really get too much into that. Does it do pay-per-view buys? It's gonna do pay-per-view buys because Canelo's gonna do pay-per-view buys, and now that's the fact that he's fighting an undefeated knockout artist who has not looked great in any of his last at least three performances. Actually, he's looked like he's been on the decline. One time he did look like he might be improving slightly, but still he's not showing anything spectacular. He's not looking like a world beater. He's not looking like a special fighter, right? But the fact that he is known on social media, that he's backed up by Fat Joe, that he got a little shine on ESPN, that time he was on a 16 knockout streak, the fact that he's somewhat of a commodity, even though half hated commodity, half critique commodity, or mostly critique commodity. I'm sorry. I think that it still has some type of allure. Again, to the casual fan and the hardcore fan will tune in as well. But we know a lot of people are streaming. We know the Fire Stick. We know the streaming websites. So I think that a lot it's gonna do some. How many? I don't know, man.
I'll say that it does 300,000 max.
Yeah, I would say about 350. We got people that are just they like to throw parties, depending on what date it is as well. If they
Yeah.
do for what date is it? What date was it targeted for?
I think September 12th, I think it is the date. Let me see. September 14th.
All right, so September 14th, you're talking about, I think, well, either that's on or close to it, Mexican Independence Day. So look,
Right.
dog, people are gonna buy this shit. People are gonna throw parties. They're gonna order, modelos, coronas, and they're gonna watch the fucking fight. So, let's say
Yeah,
let's say it might do now that it's on that date, and he's fighting someone of Puerto Rican descent. You could be looking at close to 500,000 buys. Now, as
I
far as
I
what
I
that,
I I highly doubt it. I mean, the Jaime Munguia fight was a fight that obviously had a little bit of hype around it that you can arguably justify in doing that Munguia fight prior to doing a Benavides fight. And that did about 450,000 pay-per-view buys. So that that did slightly below from what they were expecting. A fight with a guy that you've been saying that is a Mexico Puerto Rico, but in reality, like you said, Berlanga, he's a New Yorican that really doesn't really speak Spanish. Cotto versus Canelo, yeah, that's
yeah,
more
yeah, yeah, that's
that
it.
that
Yeah.
that's more aligned with that Puerto
No, no, of
Rico
course, because
versus
because
Mexico narrative.
he's from the island, and he definitely had
Yeah,
that crowd because it's not the
yeah.
same. You're not gonna have the same crowd if you're from the island as to being from New York, and he might be twice removed. His father was probably born here for all we know,
Yeah,
so
but
he might be a second generation
you
American.
have you have one key you have one key thing that you mentioned, which is Fat Joe, and you might get that urban crowd, like the Hot 97, the Charlemagnes of the world that
Well,
might
Fat
kind of
Fat Joe
back up.
Fat Joe has his own. Yeah, yeah, that's correct,
Yeah,
and Fat Joe also has his
exactly.
own podcast.
Exactly. So you might have, that crowd kind of supported a little bit, but realistically, I don't think that Berlanga even has that big of a social media fan base. Like he's not that well known, and he hasn't fought anyone relevant. Like the one name that he has is, I think, Jason Quigley. Like that's practically the only fight that he has, and he arguably lost versus Steve Rolls. So these are names that I'm popping up that, like, your normal casual fan doesn't really even recognize. So for Berlanga to do more than 300,000 with Canelo, I'm gonna be highly surprised. But moving aside from that point, I think that we have to start asking the question of why are we here? Because that's what truly matters. Why are we here? And the continuous choosing of picking of fighters just because you're quote unquote the face of boxing, where is that leading boxing ahead of us? Because you mentioned one thing, this seems very eerily similar to that Jake Paul situation. I had been mentioning that as long as we keep seeing these type of movement from the face of boxing, such as Canelo picking and choosing these fighters, I honestly don't have anything wrong with Jake Paul putting up a sideshow because it's kind of like Butterbean. You remember Butterbean, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so we might not like it. We might think that it's disgraceful and this is not doesn't represent boxing, but at the end of the day, boxing itself is not moving how it should be to be criticizing any type of side job. So there's a lot of things going wrong here, but
I mean that's
hopefully
a
there,
great
there
point. That's a great point. And to that, we have to add also, another name who I think he is a great fighter. I think he's a complete fighter. I think he's the best fighter in his division. But Tank Davis is another one who's known for doing such things as well. He's fighting guys that we people aren't asking him to fight. You know, he
yeah.
did it with Frank Martin. People weren't asking for that fight. We saw, yeah, Frank did great. Okay, Frank is a good fighter, but that's not the fight people were asking for. And he's done that
uh,
repeatedly. And he's also one of the faces of boxing. He's definitely the face of American boxing. So I think that you have a great point.
Yeah, I mean, the Tank Davis situation now that Lomachenko is out of the picture is gonna be very interesting right now because
The fact that he was gonna
Shakur,
pick Lomachenko, it was gonna
yeah,
have to have his name on his record and to do him dirty, and he should have
right,
fought him years ago
yeah,
instead
yeah,
of fighting the other undefeated guy in his division that everybody's clamoring for, Shakur Stevenson. So that was gonna be a
correct,
similar kind of move to what Canelo's doing.
correct. So this is actually gonna be very interesting how this ends up playing out because now that Loma's out of the picture, you have Shakur that is arguably the number two guy in the division. To me, he might be number one, but that's another argument for another day. Uh, he doesn't have a promotional company, so there is no excuse for whose side on the street you on. He does have a belt, so that puts him pretty much up there in the upper
Yeah,
echelon. And three, he does have a following, a social media following, which if we saw what happened with ESPN, it topped around like a million four or million five in views while he was fighting his last fight. So there shouldn't be no excuse for this fight to be made because this fight can be made in house and it can actually be a big house fight. So whether the fight will happen, let's see what really happens from the
yeah, yeah.
quote
We
unquote next face of boxing.
Yeah, we have another video which I dropped prior to this, speaking about that situation because of the fallout between in the Tank Lomachenko negotiations, and we addressed that particular
Yeah.
subject. But anyway, man, thanks for being on, man. Any closing statements? You give yours, then I'll give mine.
Okay. So one final thing that I wanted to mention, and this is something that I keep telling a lot of the Canelo fans that seem to label themselves as quote unquote boxing fans, and I tell them if you were really a boxing fan, you wouldn't be clamoring for Berlanga versus Canelo. And the reason is because this has a detrimental impact on the sport moving forward. And a lot of people don't really understand what that means. Once Canelo is gone, the next guy is going to pick up the baton and go off of the established precedent that has happened to have an excuse on picking and choosing, just like Floyd did. A lot of what's happening right now is just pretty much, an extension of the Floyd Mayweather era where it was
Absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
I
Not a
pick
lot
and
of it, most of
choose.
it, most of it, most of it.
I've earned the right to do this and this and that. When prior to Floyd, it was Oscar De La Hoya. Oscar De La Hoya, one win or lose, this guy was facing everybody,
One of the
everybody.
best resume to me, the best resume in boxing history. Unbelievable.
And I think yes, Floyd has some part to play in this, but also, which is kind of like a double-edged sword, is the fact that the boxer right now, or the fighter, has too much power, and as it sounds like an oxymoronic statement, whenever you have too much power and too much control as a fighter, you get to dictate your career. And if your career is only based on money and not legacy, then you're going to move the way that Canelo Alvarez is moving. So I don't know what you may want to say on your closing statement, but I'm just saying that this can have detrimental effect if the Benavides and Canelo fight does not happen in the future.
Look, man, I think that I think that that ship has sailed. I think that one of the biggest detriments to boxing in the last 20 years was Floyd Mayweather. Yeah, for all the shit he talked outside the ring, and for all the kind of performances that would put you to sleep after he talked all that shit, the picking and choosing of his opponents, the getting people hyped up to buy a pay-per-view, and then the pay-per-view, uh, as far as the performance, what you got out of it, the worth of it was definitely not what you expected from a guy that was talking so much shit. You know, we had the
Right,
build up 5 6 years with the Manny Pacquiao versus him, and we saw him like always be extremely defensive. His fights were not good. The reason he would sell his fights outside the ring, people would pay to watch him lose. So a lot of disappointments in boxing during his reign as the face of boxing. A lot of disappointments, and I think he did a lot. And a lot of people say it, he did a lot of damage to boxing. So I don't think that Canelo Alvarez is really, he's just beating a dead horse at this point. I don't think that's gonna do any extra damage to boxing. I don't think that's gonna cause any extra detriment to the sport. Is it a good thing? No, but you know what? We got a guy named Turkey Al Sheik. He's making shit happen, and he's doing a lot for the sport, and he's making fights that we thought we would never see. Usyk Fury got it popping. There was a bit of a delay because of an injury, and his other fights that I can mention. He made the Tim Tszyu versus Virgil Ortiz fight. That would have been a fucking banger, but we know Tszyu had to pull out due to injuries. He's doing that. He did that 5-on-5 matchroom versus Queenberry. Now he has a deal with Top Rank and Golden Boy. So look for those guys to be making fights together. He's doing his thing. And
yeah.
we know that if he wanted to make that fight, and I'm sure he probably pitched it to Canelo, and Canelo said no. Benavidez, if Turkey says, yo, he gets on the phone and he wants to make Benavidez versus Canelo Alvarez, he would do it. He would do it. He would do it. It would be upon Canelo whether he takes a fight or no, and he would literally have. He doesn't have an excuse now. They're both in the same weight class. He's been as mandatory, same promotional company. So I don't know what he would be asking for. What he said, 200 million, just joking
Yeah,
around,
so
but no.
I don't I don't think he's
That would be
I
my closing statement. That he's not gonna do any extra damage. It is what it is. The Canelo is what he is. He's not a he's not he doesn't do shit for the fans. He's just like Mayweather. He does shit for himself. He's the type of guy to
so
say fuck the fans.
I just want to get one last word in. When I say doing the extra damage, I not only mean what the next generation of boxers is gonna do based on what Canelo's doing right now, is also the upcoming generation going off of the Jake Paul, the antics, and all of that, and making money regardless of who it is because of the antics that you do outside of the ring. So a lot of people may not like it, but that is a byproduct of boxing itself or the sport not taking shit serious. Unfortunately,
I agree.
it is what it is, but we're just gonna have to sit there and wait.
Anyway, man,
Awesome.
thanks for joining us. You already know,
Absolutely.
share, like, subscribe, the Boxing Roundtable. Follow at the Boxing Roundtable. You already know.
Later, brother.